Bitcoin right now is a $2 trillion market cap. And I think that it's going to be, 10, 20, 30x that. And it's not going to take as long as people think. Once people realize how broken the money is, and it's happening, I see it every day in front of me here. People are understanding how broken the current system is, and they're looking for an escape. And I think that a lot of people first start in like precious metals, gold and silver. That's what I did. That was my path. You realize that the money's broken. You find a harder money, which is usually gold and silver. And then eventually, once you're in that algorithm, I guess you could say, that's when you get led down the path of Bitcoin. And I think that as more and more people start buying Bitcoin, start understanding Bitcoin, while we can't really change the supply, we can't create more of it to meet that demand. That's when things really go parabolic. And so we're going to move from a $2 trillion industry, I guess in fiat terms, to, 100 trillion or 200 trillion. And there's really no ceiling on that. That's the crazy part. So the move that we've made so far, I think when we look back, is going to be laughable. And I do think that the next 4 to 8 years is going to be the big boom, because a lot of capital still has to flow from the bond market and the real estate market. And people have to understand, how illusionary the stock market is for the most part. So all that capital still has to come. We're just, this game's hasn't even started yet, in my opinion.
I like that. And it's also what I feel like, and then with the diminishing returns, I don't buy it, because money is a lot about trust. And if trust is lost, things can move very quickly. And if trust is gained, things can move really quickly. And both kind of play into Bitcoin, where you have an exponential growth, you have trust growth, and you have just like all the buckets already open. So you have already the bond market a little bit open. You have the real estate market a little bit open. You have all the pipes towards Bitcoin already open. And now it's more about seeing that capital actually flow towards Bitcoin, because 2 trillion is nothing. I think the fixed income market is alone is like 300 trillion, which is 150x more than Bitcoin.
Exactly.
And then there's like real estate market, the equity market. Gold is comparatively small against all the other markets, but still it's like, I don't know, 10x from Bitcoin, like 15x, something like that, which is fascinating also. So we are so freaking small, and if anyone thinks that we are not early, just go out there and ask 100 people what difficulty adjustment is.
Yeah, exactly. Go ask 100 people if they'd rather have one Bitcoin or Taylor Swift tickets. Like, there's those videos that circulate, but it's like, that's the reality. It's like people are still so disconnected from what's happening here. It's laughable. It's sad. And that's the one thing I think that you and I both have in common is like, we're trying to reach as many people as we can here. We're trying to reach as many average people as we can here. We're not sitting here in a suit and tie and tailoring to the millionaires of the world. We're looking at the average person and saying, you know what, this is your one chance. This is your family's one chance in human history to actually make a dent. And it's on you. So you're either going to be remembered as a legend or an idiot, or a dipshit, as I like to say on my channel. And that's what's going to happen. In several years from now, or several decades from now, people are going to look back and say, grandpa or grandma, why didn't you get more? Why weren't you doing more? It was so obvious. And it is now. And that's kind of the whole thing to me, is like, between people, between financial advisors, everybody right now, it's a year and a half ago, I think that people had the right to be a little bit skeptical around Bitcoin, to look at it as like a risky thing that could potentially fail. But like in January 2024, when Larry Fink and the crew showed up, it was game over. Like at that point, you could even see it months leading up to that. Like, I look back at my channel and I was making videos in like late 2023 talking about how it's very obvious that Wall Street's coming here. At some point, they're going to announce that they're buying Bitcoin, and things are never going to be the same from there. And that's exactly what played out. January 2024, Larry Fink put his stamp of approval on this thing, and it's just gone up like this. And it hasn't been like the real shoot up yet, but I don't think we're too far away from that. So it's like, it's not going to zero right now. So what's going to happen with it? That's what people really have to ask themselves.
Yeah, and I'm not a chart analyst at all, but
Yeah,
I've just noticed that in the past we kind of shot up and crashed down, and now it's more of like almost like a stairs kind of a like we are reaching new levels, we're kind of consolidating, we're reaching new levels, kind of consolidating. Now maybe we just like have now a different beast in the game where the corporations and bigger institutions are buying. At the same time, retail is not as as excited about Bitcoin as I wanted to be, and then you kind of have that more consolidating, slow growth. But again, I feel like there's this switching moment when retail is coming back. And I don't know how you feel about that, but I don't see any retail right now. It's just like driven by corporations. And once retail also gets in there, like it will be crazy.
Yeah. I think it's going to be crazy even without retail, but it's going to be a lot more emotional. I think that's the one thing that's happened since Wall Street showed up is that a lot of emotion was taken out of the Bitcoin network in terms of when it's running up. People are like, well, yeah, it's probably going to go higher. When it's running down, nobody's really scared anymore. And these Bitcoin, it's true though. Like the Bitcoin aren't moving away from BlackRock. Sailor's not going to sell the Bitcoin anymore. So it's different than people sitting around on Twitter and buying, $1,000 worth. Like this stuff, it's real now. And these coins aren't going to move, which means that the very small amount of supply that Bitcoin originally had is now even much smaller. And so, yes, it's kind of been a steady staircase upwards, but I do think at some point we're going to reach escape velocity and this thing's just going to go berserk. And people are going to look back and say, man, you got into Bitcoin at $100,000. But to me, if you spent the time that we've spent in Bitcoin, it could not be more clear right now. It could not be more obvious. There's just so many indications of where this thing's going. And I can't even remember the last time I saw something that was actually bad for Bitcoin. There's a lot of bad things happening in the world between government overreach and money printing and people getting, suffering more and more. But in Bitcoin land, like there's been nothing but blue skies for like the last 2 years. It's crazy.
Actually, when you say it like that, there's like no real bad news coming in. There is no huge mining exit we had like in 2021 with China, even though afterwards I can look at that as a positive news and not a negative news. But at the time, maybe you could interpret it as negative news. And there's nothing really, we don't have an FTX anymore. We don't have a Celsius that kind of crashes down. Everything is kind of really nice. I haven't really realized that, but it seems like that. I think about I literally now think about like what has happened bad to Bitcoin in the last 2 years, and like I don't know, I cannot think about anything.
Well, and that's people try to create these different narratives of like, oh, there's going to be a huge burst when all these different public companies don't know what they're doing, don't know what they're holding, and they start selling when the price crashes. It's like, you know, last week we saw here that 80,000 coins came onto the market and it didn't even flinch. I think it went down like $3,000. 80,000 Bitcoin? Like if you look at anybody other than like Sailor, I think has 600,000 Bitcoin now, but like probably all the public companies combined, if they all sold their Bitcoin, that might not even add up to 80,000 Bitcoin. So it's like what people are fearful about, we just saw play out in real time and nothing even happened. So I just feel like the floor now, the foundation of the demand for Bitcoin, it can't really fall much lower. And if it does, it's not going to be for very long because there's just so much demand for it now. And that's the whole thing for me is like as the demand increases, as individuals, public companies, private companies, like just the amount of small businesses now are like, oh, maybe I should start holding my reserves in Bitcoin. It just makes sense. So as the demand grows for Bitcoin without changing the supply, that's just why the price will go up forever, simply because there's going to be more and more people, more and more companies, more and more demand chasing the same amount of sats.
Yeah, I mean the only thing that really changed in the last 2 years, and as a hardcore Bitcoiner, you can look at something like that as a negative, but I look at that something that's inevitable and a natural progress of adoption is the paper Bitcoin.
Yeah.
It's kind of the ETF concerns. Some also look critical at treasury companies just buying Bitcoin without actually having some product or service behind them. So I think that's the only thing where you can maybe pick a little bit at, but that's just building out the pipes, and I literally just had a podcast like an hour ago before I started with you, where we talked about that, and he is kind of the opinion that those treasury companies right now have a service. They are servicing the locked capital that cannot buy Bitcoin directly, that's still being able to buy Bitcoin. They are building the pipes towards Bitcoin. And this is kind of a service, that is kind of a product that they're offering. So it's not just out of thin air and they're creating nothing. Even though I get the criticism of like it's fiat games, but it's natural fiat games, and of course this comes like that's literally the only thing that in my head is like, oh yeah, that you could view as a negative for Bitcoin.
Yep, I agree. But at the same time, it's like, even if, they could create as much paper Bitcoin, because I agree with you. I think that there's a lot of different things happening right now. And the more that Wall Street gets involved, the more institution gets involved, the more banks start getting involved, there's going to be more paper Bitcoin here. But again, it doesn't change. If you had one Bitcoin sitting in a Sparrow wallet or a cold card a year ago, before all the paper Bitcoin games, you still have that one Bitcoin. And it's probably 10x more valuable right now, even though the fiat price isn't reflective of that yet. Like, nothing's changed in terms of that Bitcoin actually being worth less in reality, not in fiat illusionary land, but in reality. Like, that one Bitcoin is still one Bitcoin. The network's even stronger than it was. There's more demand for it than there was. And so for me, those are all just net positives. As long as you're not the one holding the paper Bitcoin, then you're going to be immune from any paper Bitcoin games. And like you said there, the bond market, I think I heard sailors say recently that they've built these 4 products now who have been kind of, attempting to build the highways from that bond market into Bitcoin. But even Strategy, the biggest player here, they have, I think, about 5% of the bond market right now. Not they don't have it, but they have the ability to take from about 5% of the bond market, because their products still aren't, what's it called, ranked or rated. So that they're not even rated yet. Once Strategy gets rated as like a credit worthy facility, then they're going to allow that whole market to flow in. Right now, it's at only about 5% of possibility. I think they've captured like 0.1% of it or something. I don't know the actual numbers there, but it's very small. And there's a lot of capital that still needs to flow into this thing. And so I think that this will continue. But the main thing that people need to understand is that Bitcoin in your own custody is what you really want. That's what's going to make you immune from inflation, paper Bitcoin, everything else. Is just get Bitcoin, put it in self custody, and sit back.
Yeah, with the products, what is it? Stride, Strive, Strike, and now Stretch.
Yeah.
I literally have no clue about them. Like I have some clue about them, but I don't even want to start explaining them. I recently got into a chat with like just ChatGPT and like trying to figure those things out, and I'm like, anyways, I don't want to participate in them. I just realized like the one thing I know about them, as you just described, those are the pipes from
Yep.
financial city to Bitcoin city, or from fiat city to Bitcoin city, and that's the important thing for me. And you mentioned the privacy thing, or I don't know, for some reason I thought about that. Today, actually, Frank Korver is at the hearings. Did you know about like the samurai wallet deaths? And they're changing now to plead guilty, which will be super interesting to see, like how this whole thing turns out. That's also one thing when I thought about what happened negative to Bitcoin. I mean,
Yeah.
that's something that doesn't like, it's not a negative directly to Bitcoin. I don't like, it is something negative, but like not impacting something at price like Celsius or FTX would be. But yeah, that's that's the only other thing that I could also think about.
Yeah. And I think that that's much more, that has a much bigger impact on Bitcoin itself, something like that, where you can throw somebody in jail for, writing code or, releasing open source software. That's a problem. That is a big problem. And I do think it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. That's, to me, that has a much bigger impact on Bitcoin itself than the paper Bitcoin stuff happening, because that's just the price in fiat terms. Whereas the Bitcoin development, the things being built right now, people need to feel like I wouldn't say comfortable, but they can't be scared for their lives. They can't be scared that somebody's going to come to their house and put them in jail if they build this piece of software, if they build this application or build this wallet. So that is still a problem. And again, I think that because of what Bitcoin's doing here, it's changing the landscape of everything. Like in my mind right now, strategy is the most powerful entity on the planet. And I know that they don't have the military behind them, but again, we have to watch this whole thing play out still. And so, it's important, I think, to understand where we are, how early we are, and it's important to have people, like certain governments, helping more than they're hurting. But yeah, it's scary. It really is. And depending on what country you're watching this from, you probably have it different than somebody in a different country in terms of like the ability to self custody Bitcoin, where you can buy Bitcoin. Even in New York City, it's very difficult for people in New York City to actually buy Bitcoin and take custody of it. And that's like it's right next door to me here. So it hits a little bit harder, but it's like governments still have the ability to make Bitcoiners' lives very difficult. And I think that is probably going to be our biggest challenge going into the next decade here.
Why is it in New York difficult?
They just have different laws and regulations there. It's kind of state by state in the U.S. in terms of their ability, their financial, regulations, I guess you'd call it. The regulators don't like Bitcoin very much in New York. I hope it changes, and I've seen a lot of positive things happen in the last 7 months here in the U.S., which usually has a bigger impact, a trickle down effect to the rest of the world. But it's still, Bitcoin's whole job here is to separate money from state. And so, of course, state's going to be a little bit pissed off about it.
But you can still buy it. It's just like a KYC thing that holds people back, or like something like that.
You can still buy it, but you can't move it. You can't withdraw it. So if you had like Robinhood or Coinbase, I'm pretty sure anyways, unless something's changed in the last couple months. But yeah, in New York City, you can basically buy Bitcoin, get the price exposure to Bitcoin. But when you want to cash out, or in this case, move it to your own wallet, you can't. You have to actually, take fiat. You have to have a taxable event there. So it is tough. And I'm not so worried about people being able to buy Bitcoin. Obviously, when there's more people able to buy Bitcoin, when the highways expand, it's better for Bitcoin because there's more demand. But my biggest fear is them coming after the developers, the people who are, responsible for securing this network. But the nice thing about Bitcoin and what makes Bitcoin unique in this sense is like there is no CEO. There's no company that the government can actually go and subpoena. And so I think that if people keep that in mind, the one thing that you want to do here is get your Bitcoin into your own wallet, because there it cannot be, confiscated for a similar, 6102 attack like the government did. If you have Bitcoin in your own custody and you have that Bitcoin secured properly, then you're almost immune to it all. But it is still bad when they're coming after developers, when they're making it difficult for people to buy Bitcoin. It's still not ideal, but again, I do think that we're moving in the right direction. And just having things like open source products and software, I think that is the one thing for me that gives me a lot of hope. I spent a lot of time on Nostr. I watched different people within Bitcoin, some less known people, and there's a lot of really good, really intelligent people building in Bitcoin. There's a huge brain drain happening from the fiat system and coming over to Bitcoin. And I think when you put those people together and build things with the technology and things that we have at our fingertips now, I do think that over the long term, freedom wins, sovereignty wins. But it's going to be a bumpy ride, I think, on the way there.
Yeah, open source is so important, and open source, just having and I literally I did that a few months ago, where I just sat down and was like, hey, let's see the Nostr client. And Primal, for example, is open source. You can download it and try to change it around as you want, and you could possibly host it yourself and just interact with your own client. That's the level of freedom which is just awesome. Like just having the possibilities to see codes, improve it, adapt it for yourself, host it yourself. But we are very far away from that being anywhere near mainstream. Like most apps that we use, I mean, all the apps that I use right now with you are all closed source, are all centrally controlled and like closed sourced. But I do hope that open source eventually wins, and money for some reason is the first main thing where open source wins. Like Bitcoin is open source for the few people that might have not seen that, but like Bitcoin, you can see your code, you can change it around. If you don't like the current setup of Bitcoin, you can fork it and run your own Bitcoin. I don't I don't recommend doing that because most likely nobody else will buy your coin, but you can do that, and that's a great thing of Bitcoin and open source. And if that comes to everything, like I'm all for it.
I think it will. And you're right. There's a very, very small percentage of people who actually care about it right now. And that might never change. But I do think that there's enough people who care about it where it is actually going to slowly seep into different things. And people are going to become more and more aware of the dangers, of using Google, of using, whatever it may be, Coinbase, all these things. Like, I know there's no open source Bitcoin exchange, but I do think that people are more in tune, especially Bitcoiners. They care about this stuff. They care about their privacy, and I think that that's one thing that I've noticed lately is it's not just the money. It's really a whole mindset shift, a whole perspective shift. It's you care about different things when you become a Bitcoiner. You care about who's owning your data, who has the ability to shut you down, how many income streams you have coming in, how much value can you provide. It's a whole different. I really feel like this is kind of crazy to say, but I really feel like the person I was before Bitcoin died, and Bitcoin was part of that. The whole 2020 pandemic was part of that. But I'm a completely different person today than I was 5 years ago, like night and day. I feel like every cell in my body has changed. I care about different things. I understand things differently. And it's just, I think that that's going to have a trickle down effect as more and more people spend time in Bitcoin, not learning about money and history, but just like, the way that I think the way the world should be in terms of you add value to the world, you get value in return. Because the fiat system basically allowed people who weren't adding value to the world to extract value from others who were adding value to the world. And that never works. It works for a little while. Maybe you can kind of cheat nature, but eventually we go back to nature all the time. We have throughout human history. And I think we now have the tools and the ability to make real change today. Again, between the internet, between Bitcoin, between AI, between open source models being built and software being built, I do think that there's enough people who care that we are going to see that change, and it's exciting. It's exciting to be at the whole forefront of things right now. It gets me out of bed like a cannon every morning because it's like, man, we got a real opportunity here in Bitcoin, in helping people become more private, less reliant on the state, more sovereign. And that's, in my opinion, the whole goal here.
It's an extremely good point of saying that, and there are some Bitcoiners out there that always paint a very negative picture of saying like, oh, the life got so bad. But overall, technology improved our life in the last just like 5 years, in the last 20 years, in the last 50 years, a lot. And if you just look back and seeing like what you can do now, the richest guy like 500 years ago couldn't even do, like not even close to that, like flying around, chatting with friends across the globe and all those cool things like this. We are extremely privileged and extremely rich, and this is something we shouldn't take lightly, and we shouldn't take for granted. And I love the sentence, "What a time to be alive." It really hits home hard.
It's true. And if you think about the people who were here for the last 111 years. So that's kind of where everything starts for me, is like when everything bad started happening slowly to the world, is like back in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve, Jekyll Island, that kind of stuff. That's, if you only got to live during that, that's kind of sad to me. If you only spent your whole life living in fiat world and wars and all that kind of stuff, it's sad. And you never got to see what I think humans are capable of. And I think that if you are born 100 years from now, you won't have the opportunity to, be the ones digging for the gold right now, which is where Bitcoiners are. So people don't understand how fortunate they are. Bitcoiners aren't lucky in the sense that, we bought this thing randomly and it went up. Bitcoiners are lucky in the sense that we were born right now and we got to be here for the first 50 years of Bitcoin. and we got to, put our flag in the ground and say, this land in cyberspace, it's mine, and I'm going to do everything I can to protect that for my family for the next 1,000 years.
Who do you think benefits the most from Bitcoin outside of those who adopted the quickest? Like, who do you think will benefit from Bitcoin? Saying like if assuming everyone would adopt it at the same pace and the same acceleration.
I mean, the people who have been on the other end of money printing for the last 111 years, like the Africas of the world, the Thailands of the world. I don't want to start because I'm not, great at that kind of stuff, admittedly. But the people, when you think about the US being the world reserve asset, the US dollar, basically what happens there is that the inflation gets exported to other countries, right? Because if you think about this hoodie that I'm wearing right now, let's say it costs $50. If we were to get this hoodie made here in Canada or the US or somewhere in the Western world, it would probably cost $300 to make. But we export that. We export the inflation and try to, keep costs low enough where people aren't rioting in the streets, essentially. So we've exported that inflation to places like China, Thailand, Cambodia, things like that. And so they've been on the other end of this money printer. We give them fake money and they send us real things back. And that's a problem. And so one thing that Bitcoin changes is nobody has the ability to increase the supply. Nobody has the ability to turn on the money printer or just add more zeros to it. It's a fair, transparent system, I think, that every single person on this planet is going to benefit from.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.